All right, folks, it's going to be a slow morning. It's almost 10:30, so let me go ahead and get started so we are not wasting any time. It's a small room, so everyone can hear me, but we do have to wear the microphones because they do record the screens. So good morning, and thank you again for coming out to Progress Next. I was doing a session yesterday where I was asking, like, who has traveled the farthest to get here? And I said, I'm Pennsylvania. I'm like 3 hours away. And then I had somebody in the room from Netherlands and then Australia. And today is not going to be any different because you're Sweden, right? And you're Bulgaria. How about you guys? Norway. See, I'm nothing. How about you? Okay, so yeah, we are just a little north. Yeah, so welcome and thanks for coming all the way out. Since this is a small group, we can kind of keep things personal. I can talk about things that maybe are of interest to you. In the room is also Vesco. He's actually our engineering lead for our Xamarin suite. So he knows all the things. I'm fluffy. So if you have any questions, we are here. We are here to help. So let's understand you guys a little bit. I talked to some of you. You do some development, mostly web stuff. Yeah? Yeah. How about you? What do you do? You too? Are you developers? Okay. Okay. .NET or JavaScript? Okay. All right. How about you? .NET. Yeah. And you do .NET as well. Okay. So my goal here, and 45 minutes is actually not a very long time. So my goal here is to kind of maybe show you why you should get excited about Xamarin. If you are a .NET developer, I'm going to show you maybe a few things about what you can do today with Xamarin. We actually tried giving you some UI that really helps. And then let's talk about tomorrow, what you may be able to do with Xamarin.Forms in particular, right? So let's dig in. All right, so my name is Sam Basu. I am a developer advocate here at Progress Software. I mostly come from the Telerik side of the family. So we have been making .NET UI for web, desktop, and mobile, and testing tools, and reporting solutions, and productivity tools. We have been doing this for 17 years now. So Vesco and me both come from the Telerik background. So that's me on social. So if you are on Twitter, Skype, GitHub, anything, that's who I am. So if you need to get hold of me, continue the conversation, that's who I am, or where you can find me. So let's talk about mobile and Xamarin.Forms and all the good things. So we're going to spend pretty much all of our 45 minutes on mobile apps today, but it's important that we keep in mind that unless you're working in a startup, you're not just doing one thing. It's not just mobile that you're building. You also have web apps, right? You have a mobile web app that's responsive, right? Web app. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And I was talking to him. He has a WPF app. You have desktop apps that you maintain? What type of apps do you build? All sorts of apps. Okay. So the point is, I mean, we are all doing a variety of different things. It's not just mobile. So at the end of the day, how can you share code? How can you have maximum code reuse when you're building a mobile app versus all of the other things? So let's talk about mobile first for a little bit. Hey, good morning. Here are a couple of things that I should kind of mention before we kind of jump into Xamarin land. There are lots of different ways in which you can build mobile apps today, right? So you don't have to do Xamarin. There's a lot of help. Lowest common, kind of lowest hanging fruit is mobile web. If you have a website, there is no reason why it cannot work nicely on a mobile form factor. Like you do some of it already with Bootstrap. There's a lot of help. We build Kendo UI. There's Angular. I mean, all of the SPA frameworks will help. Hey, Courtney, morning. So if you have a website, make it work nicely on a mobile device, and you can kind of take that to an extreme level with progressive web apps, which is PWAs. Your mobile web can be a very good citizen on a mobile form factor. You can have users spin your app to the home screen. Hey, Richard, come on in. You can have them, you can have service workers running in the background, so you can do push notifications, you can have a nice experience. If you want to do native, this is hard. You can do iOS, Android, and Windows native, but it's 3 different code bases. It's very difficult to maintain. But I'm not saying you won't build for native. If you have a real scenario, and if you have the resources and the time, go build for native. But for everything else, you would like to build a cross-platform app that hopefully from a single code base, you can go everywhere. If you are into any kind of web technologies, this has gotten a lot easier. We started off building hybrid apps, which were the Cordova or the PhoneGap way of doing things. You're using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, packaging it up, putting it in the store, and it works. But it's not really a native app, so performance isn't the best. If you would rather do a native app, this concept of JavaScript native apps has come a long way in the last couple of years. This is where you're using JavaScript and TypeScript and Angular to build native cross-platform mobile apps for iOS and Android. And again, these are apps that are absolutely native. You can put them in the stores, and it works beautifully. So what I'm saying is, if you are doing web stuff, if you are into JavaScript and any of the SPA frameworks, go do mobile apps that way, because you will have a better story of code sharing between your web and your mobile apps. But if you would rather write .NET, this cross-compiled story is very compelling. Xamarin is what we'll talk about. We'll also talk about Uno a little bit. This is Flutter. This is from Google, where you can use Dart, and you're still building cross-platform native mobile apps, right? So things have come really a long way when it comes to building for mobile. So choose something. Whatever you choose, you will not be limited. The SDKs, the IDEs, it's all very mature now. So let's talk about Xamarin. We're going to kind of dive into Xamarin. Let me, maybe give me 20 minutes to just kind of go through the slides, and when we're all bored, I'll show you some demos. How about that? So instead of switching back and forth, let's just talk about the overview of everything. So Xamarin, the underlying thing is .NET, obviously. So .NET, again, has been evolving quite a bit. With .NET, you can do a lot of different things now, web, cloud, mobile, you name it. This is kind of a broad picture of where .NET stood maybe a few months back now. So this is the .NET framework as we know it for the last 15 years, still going strong with .NET framework. This is .NET Core, which is lean, cross-platform. And then Xamarin runs on Mono, which is an implementation of .NET on other platforms. And Mono is very mature, and Mono is here to stay. So there are different .NET BCLs for different types of apps that you're building. And again, the tools have come a long way. As of, let me see, as of early this week, as of this Monday, Microsoft is having a conference called Build this week. And this is the future of what's coming. And we knew this a little bit going ahead. But .NET 5, or one.NET as they're calling it, this is the next iteration. So they are kind of giving you one combined .NET for all things. You still get to switch around the runtimes if you wanted to, but as a developer, all of the APIs are right there for you. If you're building web, desktop, mobile, it's all right there. It's one .NET, and it's going to support everything, all types of applications on top of it, right? So if you are into .NET, you should feel good about where the tooling and where things are headed for .NET. Xamarin makes it very easy. If you're a .NET developer, in the room is also Richard, who's my good friend and very enterprising Xamarin developer. So Xamarin makes it very easy if you're a .NET developer to make native cross-platform mobile apps. So the promise is let's kind of explore a little bit as to what Xamarin can do under the covers, how you go about building apps, and then we'll see where Xamarin apps can go. So this is where Xamarin started. This was what they called Xamarin Native or Xamarin iOS or Android. You still have to build for iOS, Android, the heads differently for each platform, but you get to write some C#, which was a step in the right direction because you get to share some code, but you had to build for each platform separately, which was a good step, but I'm obviously much more fan of this, which is Xamarin.Forms. It's about 5 years old now. This is taking the code sharing to the next level of writing a shared UI code, which is incredibly difficult for iOS, Android, and Windows because these are 3 very different platforms, but they give you abstractions, and they'll give you quite a way to get your app without having to know iOS or Android. Because as a .NET developer, I don't want to learn a lot of iOS, right? If I can get away writing my shared code in XAML, then that's what I'll do. How many of you write XAML? You've done some WPF? Any? Yeah? Anyone else write XAML? Okay, yeah. So XAML and C# is what we do to write that shared layer. Again, people ask questions about, should I build for Xamarin iOS or Xamarin Android like native? Yes, again, if you have to go a very low level on a certain platform, if you don't care as much about code sharing, then yes. You can actually embed Xamarin.Forms inside of Xamarin iOS or Xamarin Android now. Xamarin.Forms is where I would say this is where you should start, because again, from Xamarin.Forms, if you need to go render something on iOS or Android that's not on other platforms, you can always do that. You can do native rendering. The renderers that render the native UI, those can all be customized. So things have really come a long way. So I would almost say start here with Xamarin.Forms and then go to native if you need to. Everything that you do with Xamarin, it is native apps that you're building. So the platform and the frameworks don't come in the way. We can always do things wrong as developers, but it's all native apps. .app packages these are all ahead of time compilation, even for Android. You don't have to do JIT anymore. It's all native, pre-compiled, so very, very fast in terms of performance. Everything. These are some Microsoft slides I'm sure you have seen. Everything that you can do with Swift and Objective-C or Java, you can do them from Xamarin.Forms. The abstractions, the APIs, they're all there. And Microsoft obviously loves open source, so everything is open source. So prior to the Microsoft acquisition, Xamarin used to be expensive. It was $1,000 per developer per platform. And now it's all free. So there are some services that I'll maybe mention that are not free, but for all purposes, the tooling, everything about Xamarin is free and it's open source. So we can build from source if you need to change something. Xamarin.Forms is what we're going to spend the most time with. You get a lot of things in Xamarin.Forms that are kind of built in. The MVVM type pattern that really helps with building apps, data binding, navigation, IOC containers, it's all there. With Xamarin.Forms, so you get a rich environment to come and start. This is how you kind of start laying out your apps, because your apps are a combination of different types of pages and how you navigate between them. So you have several pages to choose from and several layouts to choose from as to how you render. In Xamarin.Forms 4.0, which is the latest one, they have a new concept called Shell, which is another way. They're trying to help you out a little bit with the navigation, but again, this is fine too. So different ways of building and laying out your controls. This is a glimpse of what you get out of the box. So probably this is not exhaustive. There are more controls that you get out of the box. These are all abstractions. So when I say render, let's say an entry, which is like a text box, it renders the corresponding native text box on iOS, Android. So that's what the renderers do, and you can customize the renderers. But again, this is not all. You are likely going to need more controls, and this is where like we can step in and help. The goal is to write XAML. So if you have done any WPF or UWP, this is the same XAML. It's just a different dialect of XAML. The goal is to write XAML and then have it render as native UI on each platform, right? So that's the whole promise of Xamarin.Forms. How do you actually go build your apps? You're going to need some things. So first is if you have any NuGet dependencies, if you want to bring in some things, you can always do that. All .NET NuGet packages are welcome in Xamarin apps. This is something we used to use quite a bit. It was called Xamarin Components because our phones have lots of sensors on them, right? There's a camera, there's an accelerometer, there's a GPS, gyroscope. So how do you get access to those? You don't want to write native code. So these are the abstractions that let you just write C# and you get access to all of those sensors on your phones. You can still do that. They're going to maintain that open source, but they are starting to do this. This is my good friend James Montemagno, is a PM at Xamarin. So this was his baby, and they essentially wrapped up about 30 or so platform-specific APIs into a single NuGet package. So I would almost recommend use this going forward. And they do some smart things. So if you are using this, and if you just maybe use the I don't know, like just the geolocation APIs, they're going to do some tree shaking so they're not bloating up your app with their app package. So they're going to be a little smart. So use this going forward. And then we come in and help a little bit. We make Telerik tools for all types of .NET applications, web, desktop, and mobile. I'm obviously a huge fan. I work quite a bit on the Xamarin side of things, and there's Vesco, who's our team lead. So we build Telerik UI for Xamarin, and the goal is to give you UI that is that's what you're going to need for your enterprise apps. The hard things that are really difficult to build, like the graphs and the charts and the sliders and the side views. So all of those things are ready for you to use. They are extremely performance tuned for, and it's you can use them from a Windows or a Mac. And it's just a NuGet package that you can bring in. We give you lots of customization options. I'll show you some of the sample apps that we can do for you. So the goal is to give you all of this UI ready out of the box. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Things that your apps are going to need, like the data grids, the calendars, the schedulers, all of it, the charts and graphs, they're all kind of ready for you to build. And if you have any Telerik DevCraft subscription, this is included. So you can use it anytime. Okay, a few more things as you go building your apps, some things that you might need. This is something I'm fond of, Visual Studio App Center. This is Microsoft's cloud service. You actually do need a Mac of some sort to build an iOS app because the app is built with Xcode. So this will actually do the cloud builds for you. If you are on a Windows machine, if you just don't have a Mac, they'll do it for you. They also do CI/CD pipelines. They can also do enterprise distribution. If you don't want your app to be in the store, they can do all of that. And it's not just for Xamarin, it's for pretty much any kind of technology stack. So this is very nice. Any questions so far? We good? Okay. All right. So these are some things I'll talk about because mobile apps are hard. It's a hard business to be in. If you are an enterprise and you're writing B2C apps, you have it a little easy because you have your customers. But if you just want to write an app for the App Store, it is brutal. Because just think about how easy it is for a user to uninstall your app. Like one bad experience, your app is gone, right? So you have to do everything possible to keep your users engaged, right? So I'll talk about some of these things. The cloud helps. Any kind of intelligence in your app helps. Any kind of bots that you want to integrate, all of these things keep your app engaging for the user. So I'll show you some demos. So. And if you're using the cloud, I mean, you can really use any cloud. We offer some cloud offerings, but I mean, Azure is obviously the big giant, and so is AWS. So use anything that you feel like. I'm going to talk about this one in one of my demos. I'm a big fan of this. This is not really AI or machine learning. You get to use it just as a RESTful service, but all of the machine learning and the models, they are all kind of built in. You get to just simply call into these things and do vision, do speech. So it's a little more customization for the user, keeps your apps nice and engaging. So I'll talk about this a little bit more. But again, others have similar offerings. It's not just Azure that you have to use. You also want to have code reusability. So as you are building Xamarin apps, you want to think about what else can I do? If I'm building a Xamarin app and he's building an ASP.NET app, why can't we share more code? And the way you do that is .NET Standard Library. So any piece of business logic that you have for your enterprise, abstract that out, put it in a DLL by itself, make it a .NET Standard Library, then you can share better between all types of .NETs. And that story is going to keep evolving because you can have any number of .NETs, they can all share code with the .NET Standard. This is something that is actually not going anywhere, but I will mention this because this is hard. So XAML over the years has evolved quite a bit. No one team at Microsoft really owned XAML. Everyone took XAML, did their own thing, so it's different. WPF XAML is different from UWP XAML, and Xamarin.Forms XAML is very mobile specific. So there are these annoying differences, like on Xamarin.Forms, you'll call something label versus like a text block. You'll call something an entry versus a text box. These annoying things are there. They are trying to see if there's a possibility of a universal XAML, but this is hard because like WPF XAML is like very different from Xamarin.Forms XAML. So maybe eventually we'll have a universal dialect of XAML, but it's not there yet. Okay, 20 minutes, and let's get into some of the other things that Xamarin.Forms can actually do for you. Any questions so far? Any thoughts? Any concerns? Very good? Okay. So let's talk about the other things that your mobile apps and your code can do for you. One of the platforms that Xamarin.Forms supports is this thing called UWP, which is Universal Windows Platform. This is Microsoft's bet for taking Windows everywhere. So this is not just for Windows like PCs or laptops. This is Windows everywhere. How many of you had like Windows phones back in the days? Yeah, I had some Windows phones. I still do, actually. Windows Phone has died many times over. But when I say mobile, it's the tablets, anything that is kind of mobile that runs Windows. So UWP is nice because it takes it everywhere on like a Surface Hub or a HoloLens. This is a platform that you can target with Xamarin.Forms, right? And in the last couple of months, there were some discussions where should Xamarin.Forms keep supporting UWP? And the answer for now is yes, and they want you to do that because I would almost go to the extent of saying, why should you write a native UWP app? With the same technologies, same expertise with .NET and XAML and C#, you can write Xamarin.Forms. and then you have iOS and Android. So you don't have to be stuck to just the Windows ecosystem. So if you're writing a Xamarin.Forms app, this is nice. I actually, I don't have it with me, but I have a Hololens, and your Xamarin.Forms apps run just fine on a Hololens. I mean, it's 2D. If you wanted to go 3D, you'll have to go Unity. But it's nice that your Xamarin.Forms apps just work everywhere, right? So UWP is here to stay, and this is a platform that you should target if you're building Xamarin.Forms applications, right? It's nice. It's Windows everywhere. Now, there are a few things that have happened in the Xamarin.Forms space, especially in the last 1 or 2 years, that really open up the platform a little bit more. So this is all open source, so the community steps in. And essentially what's happening is, on this shared UI code, anytime you are writing like a list view or a drop-down or a button, anything that's an abstraction, there is a piece of code that's called a renderer that's sitting behind it, and at runtime it renders the native UI for iOS, Android, and other platforms, right? And people have taken these renderers and they have written it for other platforms, right? So there are now renderers that take Xamarin.Forms to Mac, to GTK Linux, to WPF as well. So there are a lot of these things that are kind of extending Xamarin.Forms to other platforms. How many of you heard of Tizen? If you have a Samsung device that is not running Android, it is running Tizen. So it's most likely that your refrigerator or your TV is running Tizen. And that's a platform you can target with Xamarin.Forms now. And they have worked quite a bit on the tooling side of things. So you can run your Xamarin.Forms app on your refrigerator, because why not, right? So Tizen is here to stay. And then there have been some integration points with the web. We'll talk about this more. But this was something they announced last year. You can actually style Xamarin.Forms applications with CSS, which is weird, right? Why would you style XAML with CSS? But you can. It's an option. It boils down to being XAML styles behind the scenes, but it's an option. So again, what I'm trying to say is the framework and the platforms are opening up to support more and more things. Let's talk about desktop, because again, that's a big part of what runs enterprise businesses. This is where we are at today with .NET Core 2.x, whatever you call it, is the latest thing. And later this year, you are going to have .NET Core 3, which brings .NET Core to the desktop. So now you can have WPF and WinForms applications running on .NET Core. And a lot of questions we get is, should I do this right away? No. If you don't need any of the latest APIs, and if you don't need to run side-by-side .NET, like for you who runs WPF, you don't need to upgrade. But if you do need any of these newer APIs, and if you do want the benefits of .NET Core, the performance tuning, then you can run WPF and WinForms. And again, similar technologies of XAML and C# that take your expertise and your code base to desktop applications. This is something Apple is working on. Turns out the App Store problem isn't just Microsoft's. iOS is, that's a done deal. And I mean, iOS has millions and millions of apps in the store. And some might even argue that it's actually problematic, because like your app discoverability is hard. When Windows Phone first came out, I wrote like a shopping cart app that was like the first or second shopping cart app in the Windows store. And it was great. But like iOS, search for like shopping carts. They're like thousands of shopping carts app, right? So how are you going to discover your app? So it's very difficult. So iOS is, it's a done deal, and it's very profitable for mobile developers. But the Mac App Store is not in a good spot, because like people don't want to write Mac desktop applications a whole lot. So Apple is trying to have iOS apps run on Mac, right? And this is going to come later this year or maybe early next year. They already have a lot of their apps, like the stocks and the news apps, running on a Mac desktop. So they're doing some funny things between AppKit and like AppleKit and UIKit to give you that like a hamburger menu and just a little more real estate, so your iOS apps run on a desktop. The good news is all of those iOS apps can be written with Xamarin.Forms, right? So now your app automatically works on a Mac desktop, right? So one more desktop thing for you to support. This is from another framework. It's from a couple of really smart guys up in Canada. They wrote this thing called the UNO platform. So for some reason, if you do not like Xamarin.Forms, XAML, and if you would rather write the UWP XAML, which again, I mean, I don't see why you would prefer one over the other, but if you wanted to write UWP XAML, then go do UNO platform. Because this is, they are using Mono and Xamarin under the covers, but the UI stack is actually UWP XAML. And they do take that XAML to iOS or Android, right? So it's just another way of writing the UI layer. But under the covers, it is it is UWP XAML and Xamarin. We also make a product suite called Telerik UI for UWP. If you're building UWP apps, then we'll give you more than 24 all of the charts and graphs that you can think of for your UWP apps. And this actually is free and open source. It's built into some of the Windows template studios. So if you're building for UWP, this is ready for you to use. Let's talk about the web, because a lot of you write web applications. You may still be angry or hurt if you did this. Anyone? Yeah? Yeah? I did some Silverlight back in the days. You guys all know the history. So Steve Jobs wrote a scathing letter where he said, Flash sucks, right? And he kind of killed off, and Flash had some vulnerabilities, but he kind of killed off the plugins model for the web. And Silverlight, I mean, Microsoft never really said Silverlight is dead, but we all saw the writing on the wall. Like you're trying to upgrade, so everybody is trying to upgrade their Silverlight apps to something else. So the folks who did Silverlight, we loved it, right? The dev experience is fantastic. You get good tools, you get C# and XAML. So can we bring some of that fun back to building for the web? And the answer may be yes, because this thing is coming up. This is called WebAssembly. Anyone know about WebAssembly? This is almost similar to what the JavaScript engines do. So when you have a SPA application, when you have JavaScript, there is an engine. So there is Chakra is no more, but like V8 and then WebKit, these are all engines that power your browsers, and they know how to execute JavaScript on the client side. What if we had a language that is almost assembly-like, but it's kind of compiled down from higher level languages that your browser can also execute at runtime, right, natively. So that's the promise of WebAssembly, and they started with C and C++ and Rust, and then they've gotten to C#. So things have come a long way. This is still early days, but this is not a Microsoft or a Google thing. It's an open web standard. So everybody is supporting it, and it's a way for you to write higher level languages and then compile it down to WebAssembly and run them natively in your browser, right? So maybe there is some hope of bringing XAML back to the browser. We may still be early days. Microsoft is doing a few things. It is still Mono that is doing most of the heavy lifting, because Mono, again, is very rich and powerful. So Mono was best suited, because what they do is they take your C#, when you compile it, it gets down to IL, and then they use LLVM optimizers, and then they compile it all the way down to WebAssembly. And since this is Mono powered, they also have things like Blazor, which is the ASP.NET route of going to WebAssembly. If you want to do like Razor type syntax, that's for your web applications. But this also means that we can bring Xamarin.Forms, XAML, back into WebAssembly through Mono, right? So again, early days, we don't know where things are headed, but the promise is right there. Okay, I've talked for, I don't know, almost 25 minutes. Some demos, right? Let's see some of this stuff in action. How long do I have, Veska? Is it like 11:15, right, this session? All right. Okay, let's try to show you most of what we talked about. Maybe let's begin with not that. Maybe the cloud and the AI stuff. Yeah, let's start here. Okay. I'm going to pull up Visual Studio here. I am on a Mac. Again, for Xamarin, it doesn't make a difference. Visual Studio is the same, whether you're on a Mac or a Windows machine. So let me try to show you a few examples of where Xamarin.Forms stands today and where things may be heading in future. Okay, so this here is a simple Xamarin.Forms solution. This is kind of a standard boilerplate thing. File new project Xamarin.Forms, this is what you get. This one here is my shared repository. Let's see if my clicking is working. No. Uh-oh, Visual Studio froze. Okay, hang on. Let's restart. Really? For some reason, it won't let me select things here. Okay, that's a little weird. Let's see if it'll let me run it. Okay, well, at least we can navigate this way. All right, so let me show you a little bit of what this app is trying to do. So what I was trying to show you was this is a Xamarin.Forms solution. You have a shared repository this is a .NET standard library and that you can share between all platforms. And then I have an iOS project. You can have an Android project and a Mac project and a WPF project. So essentially, these folders are needed because when you do a build, it's doing a native app package build. So your screenshots, your splash screens, anything that is platform specific needs to go into those platform specific products or folders. But your goal as a Xamarin.Forms developer should be to write everything that is abstracted, everything that is shared in your .NET standard library. So what you see here is me just creating a list of 5 strings, right? Super fancy, just 5 strings that I'm newing up. And then that's my view model. And here in my XAML, I'm binding that view model to a list view. I'm using a Telerik list view, but I'm not using any of the features. But I'm handing off that collection of 5 strings to my UI. And then if I go back here and if I, right. If we look at the XAML here, I do have a stack layout, and then I have some, not this one here. It's weird that it's not letting me navigate so easily. This one is what I'm wanting to show you. So I have a list view here, and I'm binding it, and I have a couple of buttons, right? So what is different here, and this is the rendering of it. This is the iOS simulator. So that's my list of strings, and these are my buttons, but it looks a little different. Where did the green and the other things come in from? So that is coming in from a couple of things. I'm using a style class, so I'm bringing in a theme. We actually offer a theme so that you can style all of your Xamarin UI consistently. And then up here, you'll notice a funny thing here. Style sheet, CSS, right? So this CSS is actually sitting right here in my project. And if I can navigate to that, it's actually this style sheet that's doing everything. So this caret symbol is what your linters are going to complain about, but otherwise it is just standard CSS. I have my dot selectors, I have my named things. I can say all labels that are inside that stack layout be red or green. And then look at this one here. I'm just saying direction RTL, which is right to left. So if you are supporting languages like Arabic, which are right to left, just one line of code, and you can flip the whole thing. And it's not just doing it for just the text, it's doing it for everything, right? So you see how easy this becomes with, where is this? With CSS, that I can style things just so easily. So if you're building a web application and a Xamarin.Forms application, you can maybe use the CSS to share some code between your web and mobile, right? So just a quick example of some CSS. And you don't have to do it. You can still do XAML styles. So let me see if I can now flip it. This is the weirdest thing. Visual Studio is not letting me click around. So let me change one quick thing here, and I'll show you what this means. Okay, not that. Let me flip the main page. So what I'm doing is I'm changing the main page, the starting page of the application, right? And what I'm going to do here is right-click. It's not letting me select. Hang on, let me see if the projector is messing it up. I'll take this off 1 second. Let me then walk you through some of this code. So essentially what I'm trying to show you is this one here, this is a Mac project. This is a Cocoa Pods Mac project. It's kind of starts off with like a storyboard type of thing, but we can say, don't do the storyboard, do Xamarin.Forms instead. So here's my app delegate file for my Mac application, and I can just new up a new window, and this here, forms.init, this is how Xamarin.Forms projects are initialized, and then we are shoving the UI into a Mac thing. So if I could switch the startup project, then I could show you, but the same code can actually power a Mac desktop application. Let's try one more time. I have 10 minutes left, right? So let's try one more time Visual Studio. I still, like, I'm clicking around, but I can't tap on things, which is weird. Let's see if I can, oh, I can do that. And then, how do I right click? Yeah, maybe not. Build action, no. All right, sorry about Visual Studio not cooperating with me at all. So let's switch. I was trying to show you the Mac application that's powered by Xamarin.Forms, but you get the point that you can still write the same XAML and C# and you can power a Mac desktop application. Let me see if I can show you a few more things here. Let me close this. Let me show you a sample app that we actually ship and what that can do for you, just to kind of give you a feel of what Xamarin.Forms can power for you today. Let's see if I can fire this up. So this is an app that you can actually go and download from your iOS or your Android devices. It's an app in the app stores. This is actually one of our sample apps for Telerik UI for Xamarin. It shows off all of our UI. And it's also nice to see what Xamarin can do today. This is purely a Xamarin.Forms application, and then just to show you a few things, like we can do charts and graphs, but this is one of the favorite things that I show off. This is conversational UI, so we actually ship some UI if you're building like chatbots, and you can connect it to any chatbot service. It doesn't need to be Azure. Ours is, one of our demos is connected to an Azure bot, but any type of bot that you have, we can give you the UI from Xamarin.Forms that is cross-platform, that works everywhere. So we'll give it a second, see if it connects, and if my network is holding up. All right, let's switch. Let's switch to my phone. Maybe the network is better. Okay, so this is a little travel assistant. I mean, it is a little bot, and you kind of get to see the power that Xamarin.Forms can give you. And this is a cross-platform UI, so it's kind of walking you through a wizard of creating a travel thing for you. And it is a bot that you're talking to. So I can select the date. That was a calendar. I can choose, like, these are little selectors that you can just tap on, so you don't have to type as much. And what it's doing now is trying to give you the next thing. If you're writing a bot, these concept of like flashcards is very enticing, because the user doesn't have to read through a lot of things. You can have some images, you can have some quick text, so it's nice and easy for you to select. And let's see if the network helps here. Yeah, maybe not. It's thinking. So let's not waste time. Let's go back and look at some more things. So let's see, what else can I show you? Oh, I can show you another application, which is nice to kind of see the power of Xamarin.Forms today. Close this. This is also an app that you can find in the stores, and it's also open source. So let me run this. So we wrote an app which we put in the stores that kind of uses some of the Xamarin.Forms UI that we build, and it kind of calls into Azure Cognitive Services. So just a little bit of intelligence in your apps, trying to make it engaging for the user. So we all take pictures with on our phones, and these pictures are hard to find when you have thousands of them. So this was an attempt to kind of tag your picture, so it's easier to search on. So this app here kind of starts with a few images here. I can choose one, and let's see if the network will hold up. And what it's doing right now, it's calling into Azure Cognitive Services, and we are giving it this image, and we are asking Azure to make sense of it. And if the network holds up, it's going to come back with something that says this is a set of flowers. Looks like the network is just not working. But I mean, you get to play around with this. This is an app that you can find in the stores, and you can see some of the UI that we put in. You can see a timeline of when things may be tagged, and then you can do search. So you can search through the things that you have tagged. So essentially, Azure tells you this is what the picture is, and then you can tag it, you can save it, and you can come back and search for it. So multiple samples that we throw out, so you can get to play around and see the power of Xamarin.Forms. This is again for iOS, Android, and Windows. So let's switch gears one more time and see if I can show you a couple more things. We have 3 minutes left. So here is another little solution. This project here is also a Xamarin.Forms project. So I have my .NET standard library. Oh, now the clicking looks to be it's working. And what I have here is a little project called Wasm, which is the WebAssembly side of things that I was showing you. And this is using a few things. This is using Xamarin.Forms to power the UI. It does actually have our Telerik UI for Xamarin bits, and it is using a framework called UI, which is an implementation of Xamarin.Forms over onto Wasm using Mono. So here is my little bit of UI. So this has been done in C#, but you can also write XAML for it. So I'm initializing Xamarin.Forms. Here's my page, here's my stack, and I am using a Telerik.Forms or Telerik Xamarin button, which you don't have to. I mean, the regular button is fine for this. But just to kind of show that Telerik UI also works on this. And I'm sticking it into a button, and here's the button's click handler, which is just that. So it counts the number of clicks, and then we are doing a publish. So when I build this, I actually have this built. So this is a .NET Core application, and it's sitting here. Here's my distribution directory. So it has a few things. It has Mono.js, it has MonoWasm, it has a little bridge interop between JavaScript and .NET. And so when I fired this up, I think I had a terminal window sitting up here. So I am already on that folder. So what I can do is I can do a .NET serve at, I think it likes port 8000. Port 8000, I think. Yeah, so it's just listening on port 8000, right? So if I go up to my browser now, and if I do localhost 8000, what you're going to see is a little spinner initially. Let's see if it works. See, it's loading. Okay, so see that button? It's just one button. It's not doing anything. But if I keep clicking this around, you see the clicker, the count goes up. But if I pull up my network tab here, right, and if I keep clicking, we are never coming back to the server. It is literally running client-side C#. So the funny thing is, if I reload this, you will see what it's doing behind the scenes. So this is what it's pulling down from the network layer. And some of it is cached, so it's a little fast now. But these are .NET DLLs that we are shipping to the browser. So System DLL, Xamarin.Forms DLL, Telerik UI for Xamarin DLL, these are all things we ship to the browser, and we never came back to the server because this is running on WebAssembly. It is using some of these newer frameworks, so it can just run and make sense of C# code at runtime in the browser. And there are multiple ways of doing this. This is the Uno platform that I was talking about. Uno platform has a nice playground which with my network, it may not quite load. But if you wanted to see like a Wasm implementation of C# and XAML, check out their playground. You can actually edit XAML code just like you did with Silverlight, and it just works nicely on a browser. at runtime. So the mono implementation of WASM is it's going along nicely. Right now, it is a lot of IL interpretation, so it's a little slow, but they're catching up. It's going to be ahead of time compilation soon, so a lot of power. Let's see if Visual Studio will let me do one last thing. I'm already almost out of time, but let me show you, because it started working, the clicking part of it at least. So this was what I was trying to show you. If I go in here, can I click? Yeah. All right, so I'm going to change my startup project, and let's see, yeah, that's already done. So I'm going to run this application here. Okay, so what you see here is a Mac desktop application powered purely through Xamarin.Forms, right? So there are multiple ways in which you can bring your Xamarin.Forms code to the desktop. I mean, there is always Xamarin.Mac, but it needs you to build the storyboards. This is powered purely through Xamarin.Forms, and you can see some of our UI actually does work on a Mac as well. So early days, but there are multiple ways. I mean, if Marzipan pans out the way Apple is designing, then your iOS apps will run on a Mac, and they can all be written in Xamarin.Forms. So essentially what I'm trying to say is Xamarin.Forms code can be shared to go to lots of different platforms, desktop and eventually web. All right, so let's go back and try to wrap things up. Where were we? I didn't show you Tizen. Let me show you one quick thing here just to kind of prove this thing here. So Xamarin.Forms can also power all types of different things. If you have like a Samsung Gear watch, that can run Xamarin.Forms now. And essentially, instead of a content page, we give it like a circular page. And again, all of the UI that's in Xamarin.Forms just starts working. On a Tizen TV, on a Tizen refrigerator, on Tizen watches. So lots of different options where your Xamarin.Forms controls can now power things. So my one last pitch would be, we, I think, live in a time where we have amazing tools to build software, right? So Xamarin and .NET really takes your code everywhere. So let's go build amazing things, mobile first, but then also you can start sharing a lot of code with your desktop applications, with your web applications, and things are going to keep evolving. So I'm completely out of time, but again, I appreciate you guys coming and spending 45 minutes with us. That's me if you want to get hold of me. That's Vesco if you have any questions for our UI. But any questions so far? I mean, you kind of start seeing the promise of what Xamarin.Forms can be today, and it can be a lot of different things going into the future, but thank you for coming out and spending the time with me, all right? I do have, yeah, thank you. I do have lots of stickers up front if you guys want to grab any stickers.